Outa-Space, International Arts and Class Struggle podcast. We're out of space because we lack the places to create. Outer space because outside is where we should decide. Outer space because that's the place where your brain needs to be to see it all. Hello and welcome. This is the first podcast of Outer Space. My name's Rob McDonald, and today is my 50th birthday. I'm choosing this day to start this podcast because it's a symbolic birthday. It's important to me, but also this podcast is a little bit about me changing my life and changing how I approach art and how I approach politics. Two things that are very important to me. So I'm spending the day in bed because it's my birthday and I can do that if I want to. The second thing is I've just spent the last 3 days with stone dust making a sculpture and I need a rest. So I'm chilling out. But I've also just come off the back of 3 months in quarantine for the coronavirus. So these three factors, my birthday, 3 days of stonework, and 3 months of quarantine, have all come together and sort of forced me, if you like, to reconsider my artistic and political outlook and approach. And therefore, I've come up with this podcast. I did a crowdfunding on Facebook using my birthday to get some money. This recording's done without the new mic that I'm going to buy, so maybe we won't use this recording, but maybe we'll use it as a opportunity to learn how crap my voice sounds, how confusing it is to do this kind of thing, how I try and be natural, all that kind of stuff. I don't really know whether I'm going to be any good at it. It could be a complete fucking disaster. But in truth, it really doesn't matter. Because the one thing that I've learned over the years is that artistic creation is one of experiment. It's one of looking to do something, but actually normally you end up with something completely different. And the key to artistic creation to me is the moment of letting go. The moment that you are making a sculpture of let's say a head. And you started with the nose and you've worked away the stone and you're looking at the nose and you really like the shape of the nose. But eventually you get to that point in making a sculpture where you have to smash that nose off to make it work with the rest of the piece that you're making. And this kind of conflict and agony and beauty of sculpting, which is what I love, is also for me represents life in general. And really that's what this podcast is going to be in some ways about on a personal level. It's going to be also about me over a number of years moving away from stone, particularly stone dust. Doesn't do my health any good, and carrying out really heavy pieces of stone for a 50-year-old bloke is not quite the same as it would have been when I was younger. So there's a personal side to all this. But for me, the interrelationship between the personal and political are big. And therefore, most of my life I've been part of a dream and organizations to fight for socialism and for changing the world, for making the world a better place. And so in recent years, I've put these personal loves of art and creation together with my need for a changing society. And this podcast will also be a little bit around those questions, because as I hit this junction at 50, and I hit this junction with what artistic creation and method I want to use in the near future, I look at society and realize that it is also at a junction, that the system of capitalism has got to a point where I think it's entirely obvious to a huge size of the population that we've got major problems. And even, you can say that we have a barbaristic development within our culture and within our societies. We have the rise of the far right. We have the unbelievable likes of people like Trump in power. And really, this is a junction. It's a junction for humanity. And I think unless we tackle that junction, unless we realize, particularly on the left, that we have to have a more creative approach to changing society than maybe has previously been done, that we have to draw in all our skills, all our forces, because this is not just a fight for an ideology. This is a fight, in my mind, for humanity's existence, to whether we will go on to be a space traveling race, whether we will achieve crazy things that you might see in science fiction and this kind of thing. So for me, we're at a junction, and it matches nicely with my personal junction. So therefore, this podcast. And the first person to be interviewed is kind of me, because I think probably you need an explanation, and I probably need to listen back to this and realize what I shouldn't do. Who knows? Let's see. So then, to give you a quick hypothesis about what I'm hoping this will achieve, I think that art is a very simple thing. It's not complex at all. There are complex ways to talk about art. There's a million different aspects to art. But actually, for me, art is a very, very simple thing. It's simply the moment of solving a problem. Whether you're working in the garden, you're trying to dig something out and you hack it slightly differently. Whether it's you're making a sculpture, like I mentioned before, and you have to chop off the nose. For me, art is simply about the moment where you have to be creative to solve a problem as a human being. And therefore, with that kind of concept, then art is kind of everything. It's kind of everything that a human has to do to get forward, to survive, the use of their labor, and the like. And therefore, culture is how we collectively pull that together. So that's like, if you like, my hypothesis of what art is. And in these podcasts, whether it be just one or two that I managed to do, or whether it be 1,000, who knows, I want to explore that hypothesis. The second thing I want to explore in these podcasts is, if you like, a challenge. And it's a challenge to the left. And I want to raise ideas and concepts and thoughts about how the left interacts with the question of art. And I think as time goes by, you'll see that I don't think that's just a straightforward thing. I think it's something that's extremely needed. And therefore, this podcast is going to be a bit of a platform, I hope, for organising artists, for affecting the workers' movement, and in that sense, moving humanity's existence forward. It sounds all very grand and all very big, but for me, these two things are very important. Okay, so what will the podcast be like? How will it run? And the honest answer is that I really don't know. I've come up with some first ideas, and with those first ideas, I'm going to try and build a platform and then let the idea of this podcast grow. The idea in my head at the moment that it would work as a kind of a magazine show, if you like. I would be the host, the presenter. And in the show, I will do interviews with the many people that I've met over the years who are fantastic artists or political activists, or have something I think could be really relevant to the struggle of art and the struggle of changing the world. So I hope to kind of interview people to give an all-rounded, broad view for us all to collectively think about the things that I'm posing in these podcasts. Second to that, I hope there'll be like a counterpoint, a counter comment, I don't want this podcast just to be myself. So I'm going to have my friend Paul, who I'll introduce later, as a bit of a counterbalance to my views. Not that we see the world completely different, we see it very similar, but Paul comes with a unique view. And I think my idea to have Paul and maybe others as counterbalances to the way that I pose the world, I think would be useful. I also want to, as much as possible, bring art and music of other people into the show. I find other people's art super stimulating, and how other people tell the story of the world, the story of how they see things in their art, for me, is essential when we're talking collectively about culture and creation. So I hope to use music from different people, and I hope to use images if at all possible. Although I think probably likely this podcast will start as a without image, but I will probably put it on YouTube straight away, and hopefully over time we will use more and more video. But I think one step at a time is very much my philosophy on this. On top of all that, I can see lots of different ways that we could fill a magazine show. Lots of different international comments, people's views, what's going on in the arts world, what's going on in the political world of the left, how these things could be fused together. I think there's many different ways that this podcast could evolve, and I'll be able to allow it to grow and flow, and obviously take advice and criticism as I develop and as I learn how to do it, because let's be honest, I haven't got a clue what I'm doing, and that's a good thing. It's fresh, but it's also could end up in a ball of dirty washing in the corner that never gets touched because I start it and I don't want to finish it. My intention is to make this into something and to make it work. So in a nutshell, I want this podcast to be educational. I want it to be collectively sharing the experience of radical artists. I want it to be educational for me. There's a lot of stuff I just haven't got a clue about, and I'm going to use it as an excuse to try and correct my ignorance on almost all issues. There are a few things I know a lot about, but the one thing I know is that I don't know a lot. And therefore, I'm going to use the podcast as a exploring method for me into worlds of the art that I don't know and politics that I don't know. And hopefully on that journey, which is personal in a sense, will collectively with everybody listening, you'll find some pleasure in it. So that's one side of it. The second side is a challenge, as I mentioned just previous. It's a challenge to the left. I've had various experiences on the left and workers' movement on the question of art. I think there are different constituencies within the left. Some don't see art as at all important. They see it as some pretty picture that they should make their website look better with, and that's about as far as they go. And there is another constituency of people on the left who see art as important, but it's a secondary question to how the struggle evolves. For me, both these views are wrong. I want to challenge them. I want to explain that I think the ideas and things that go around art creation and being an artist and the role of the artist as being critical to changing society. And that unless people on the left particularly take a very dialectical understanding of the role of art in culture, then we have no chance to change society. Within this discussion, there's a lot to be said. How we organise, what we do, how we pose ourselves, what are we fighting for, what kind of world we want. We may agree that capitalism is wrong. Why do we have a million different left groups? What is the difference between those groups? How do they see art different? And fundamentally, how can we unify? And one of my dreams is that artists will look towards the workers' movement and see it as a vehicle for changing society, which it definitely is, that artists will make that decision. But in the process of artists doing that, they actually really turn the workers' movement upside down as well. And so really, I'm looking for an interrelationship between artists and the workers' movement that would affect each other equally, because I think there needs to happen. I think we need to build a new workers' international. And I think one of the ways that that could start is by the artists, because, let's be honest, artists are a difficult bunch in general. We're hard to work with. We're always dissident if we're genuine. We're always trying to think new if we're genuine. And we're always trying to challenge if we're genuine. Art that's not those things, for me, is really a copy of something else. And therefore, I think if we take some of those positives of what an artist is, then these can be real powerful tools in the hands of the wider workers' movement. I also think that everybody is an artist. It's a bit like when somebody says to you, well, I'm not political. I think, oh, for fuck's sake, everybody's political. You just have decided to be apolitical in that particular comment. And I hold the same for art. There's a lot of people I know say, well, I don't really know about art. And that might be true because I actually don't know that much. But what I don't like to hear is, well, I'm not an artist. He's good at that. And in my opinion, if you take the broader concept of art that I posed before, then I think you have to grasp that everybody is an artist in one form or another. How they express that is very different. So anyway, that's a little bit of an introduction. There's no sort of biographical of me. If you don't know who I am, well, I'll put that on the website, and you can have a look and think, okay, that's what he's been up to 50 years old. I think that's probably important to some people, and I will do it. I'm not going to do it now, though, because I think it's slightly irrelevant. On that website, it's called Outa-Space, spelt OUTA/space. And I think probably just to finish this first sort of recording might be worthwhile mentioning why I've chosen that, because I did struggle with a name. It's always been fun when I've been in bands, when you sit around and you have your 2-litre bottle of cider and you're passing it around and you're talking about the name of your band, what we're going to call ourselves, the psychedelic monkeys from hell, or, whatever it might be. And I've had some good evenings doing that kind of things with friends. I've also had some very stressful times doing things like that with friends. The choosing of the name is important. So I've came up with the name Outa-Space for a number of reasons. Firstly, I wasn't going to use it, even though it was the name of my new website that I chose, I don't know, maybe a year ago. I wasn't going to use it because I was worried about YouTube and Facebook algorithms and whether somebody who wanted to find a radical arts podcast would ever come across me with a name that sounded like I was into cosmology, which I am, by the way. Cosmology, that's the one with the stars. That's not the one with the star signs. There's a big difference. It's the one that's science. Anyway, I think it's important that I explain why I'm going to call this podcast Outa-Space. And it's for a number of reasons. One is I haven't chosen a name like Creative Struggle or Workers in Art Struggle or any of those kind of names that might link this podcast with an algorithm or with some way of people finding it easier. Hopefully I'll have a subtitle which will do that, and I'll find ways around it that hopefully a broader number of people could find this podcast. The reason I've chose Outa-Space is because some of the similar reasons why I chose it is my website. And for me, it's Outa-Space. It's an international arts and class struggle podcast. But it's Outa-Space because we have no space to create in. Therefore, we're without space. or outer space. We don't have a place to create our art in this world very easily. You're extremely fortunate if you've got a decent workshop. You're extremely fortunate if you can practice your music somewhere, or you have the space in your economic life or any sphere. I think most artists are outer space. And therefore, that's the first reason I've called the podcast that. The second is because outer space is where things are decided. And what I mean by that is the street, outer space, outside, not in some parliamentary building where legislation is passed, but life of humans and the future is created by struggle. It's created by people turning to the streets. It's created by people saying things out loud. Outer space could also mean things like graffiti and street art, and I definitely do mean those things. But I also mean that outer space that we have to get outside of our comfort zone, but outside of our houses, and we have to go into the collective places. We have to go to the streets. We have to go to where we, as a species, as a class, decide things together. And therefore, that's the second reason why I want to call this podcast Outer Space. And the third reason that I've come up with so far is that I think outer space in the meaning of cosmology, but in the meaning of our minds, because I believe that we have to get out of our mental space. We have to put ourselves on the moon looking down on the earth. We have to put ourselves in another galaxy looking back at this planet. We have to have a sense of proportion. We have to change our mindset about how we think about the world. And therefore, the only way is to be out of this outer space, is to be out there to understand the whole. And if we understand the whole of what's going on in this world, then I think that we have a better chance. And in that sense, I mean outer space in a sense of an importance for us to grasp a collective consciousness, but also an individual one, where you take yourself out of the mindset you're in. I know some people call this like a personal revolution. I don't like that word, but it's kind of what I mean. Yeah, I mean, like, break the record, do something different, think about the world in a different place. And really, that for me is what art is. That for me, hopefully, is what this podcast will be. And I hope in time that it will become a wider and collective project. As I've mentioned, I'm going to start hopefully with Paranoid Paul, who I'll introduce shortly, who will be my counterbalance. And also Jonas Langer is going to work with me on the technical side of things, because I can't kind of pretend that I know anything what I'm doing on that level. I can do some basics, but I'm hoping Jonas is going to bring a whole aspect to this. And these are two guys that I love very dearly, but I think both of them bring different things to the table here. And so my final thing to say is you. All the projects I do, Solidarity Park, Periphery is the Centre, the Bad Art Project, all the ones that I've done in recent years have all been about, how should I say it, my art being as an organiser, not as an artist in and of myself, although obviously I am, and I'm a practicing artist and I'll continue to be so. But the thing that my art has changed in direction to being not only a political organiser, which I have been in much of my life, but an artist political organiser. And therefore, for me, the art of organising is key. And what I mean by that is not telling you all what to do. What I mean by that is creating the space for us to collectively talk together as one, to work out what needs to be done together, to listen to each other, which quite often on the left we do not. And if you like, I want the narrative of these podcasts to come from you, the people I interview, but also the way that this podcast hopefully will interact with people. And for me, I'm hoping it will be a platform We'll wait. We'll see. It might just be it might just be a bit of fun that me and a couple of mates do a couple of episodes. If it turns out to be that, well, I'll be equally happy. If it turns out to play some small part in changing a few minds or in organising a few of us, then that'd be all the more better. So I look forward to going forward, and thank you for bothering to listening to my ramblings this morning. Okay, take care now. Okay, then. So that was my introduction to this podcast. I now want to introduce you to Paul Paranoid. Paul is going to be a regular guest on the show. I'm hoping he's going to be a bit of a counterbalance in the same way as I didn't really introduce myself the last time. We're going to give Paul a little bit of chance to say hello to you. So, hey, Paul, are you there?
Hi, thanks for having me on, Rob.
Well, I'm having you on as a joke. Okay, you've got to be serious. You've got to be serious now. This is a proper show.
No, I meant thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, Paul, introduce yourself. Who are you? Where are you coming from?
I'm in the UK. I know you from the UK. We used to live together about, good grief, it must be 25 years ago now. My God. And we both know each other coming up through music and a little, for me, a little bit of politics, for you, a lot of politics. And since then, we've sort of, our lives have entwined us deeper in slightly different disciplines of that, me being more interested in conspiracy theory and you being more interested in the politics side of it. And like between the two of us, we're sort of like hoping to create a kind of a sort of a crossover conversation, really, where we both bring our respective disciplines to the things that we're talking about. I think would you say that was the sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. I think the important thing is that we come from slightly different angles, as you say. We'll tackle the conspiracy theory because I think at some point, we need to deal with that because it's a big thing these days, and we disagree on those things. So we'll come to that. We'll come to that maybe in a later podcast. The first thing to say to you, though, well, I'm putting you just hold on there with those theories. I first of all want to get here we go. Come on. No, I first of all want to get a little bit of feedback because obviously I did a 20-minute recording or so about what I want this podcast to be like. And one of the things I want our conversations to be is after I've done an interview with somebody, I want you to say, bloody hell, that was great, or God's sake, Rob, why did you invite them on? Probably you won't know the person I'm interviewing, and I want you to have like the two Muppets in the that sit up in the top of the balcony and go, oh, well, that was a load of bloody rubbish. So what I want to know from you is what's your first feelings about what I said?
Well, I thought it was first of all, I mean, excellent presentation. I thought you sounded confident and comfortable, which I think I know it sounds strange, but honestly, those are your first two hurdles. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Get that sorted out. You're on the right track right away. I think I thought it was comprehensive, and also it was brief, and that was all good. Which I know again sounds like vaguely insulting, but that's not at all the case. I think the only no that I would have that could even be remotely negative. And I sort of don't really think it's even appropriate, considering that you were just on your own, talking into a mic, making a presentation out of thin air. But it struck me, and I thought, I don't think you'd even take this over into the radio show anyway. But I've noticed that the people I listen to, the other podcasters and the other interviewers that I've listened to or even interacted with, they have this uncanny ability to edit themselves out of the conversation. And so I don't think you had any choice but to do this. But I remember thinking, all he's got to do is do this exact same thing, however, when he's doing the show, right, but almost be invisible. I don't mean inaudible. That's quite a different thing altogether. But I remember thinking, like, because, and that sounds really critical, and it's just, I'm reaching for a criticism, it wasn't what I thought. But, like you said, it was your birthday and all that sort of thing. And I thought that was absolutely legitimate. But I remember literally thinking you won't be able to do that on the show, because it's almost like the interviewer has to somehow remove themselves. And of course, not intellectually, but almost in terms of their presence.
And they also have to interrupt.
It's a stretch. I'm stretched. I'm really having to reach for that criticism, because I really didn't think there was anything wrong with it. That was the only thing I thought, because all the other things you've got going on, like your inquiring aspect of you, your background in politics, it's not. I'm not saying you switch those off, because they're still going to be in play in your questioning. They're going to be in play. I had an interview with Richie Allen. It started out as a phone-in and it became an interview with Richie Allen earlier this year. And I think in some way that somehow played some small part in us arriving here as well. And basically, what I noticed with Richie actually talking to him was the absolute, complete commitment he had to, A, the information that I had, and B, how the listeners were receiving the information. And that was quite extraordinary to experience that, because I could feel it like a probe in my mind. You know what I mean? I could feel almost like I was in a state of grace in the interview, because he was sort of, even though it was a completely remote situation, I could feel that he was sort of had an iron grip on the interview. And it wasn't restrictive or suffocating.
So like he would stop you now when you've been speaking for too long and redirect the interview a little bit. You mean something along those lines.
and yet it never felt like it was his intrusion. It felt that the listener was sacrosanct.
Yeah,
that's what I got from it.
No, I think it's an important thing. It's to allow you to make your points, but not allow you to sort of go on. I mean, the one thing I haven't done now is I haven't been timing how long we're talking for, and I think that's important, because what I don't want to do is fucking hours of editing and cutting, because that's where things don't sound real and whatever.
It will soul destroy you.
So just for this first little tester, I've got a basic opinion from you about what you thought of the first thing. You've introduced a little bit about us. I just want to, I know what the things I want to talk about in the show. Give us a couple of things that you think that we should talk about, as brief as you can. What kind of topics do you think a show like the one I presented to you in that interview, what kind of things do you think should be in it?
Golly, that's a question, isn't it? Because I must admit, I do see that kind of as your realm. I do see the show as very much an extension of your
my kingdom. Get out.
I know. And in a way, that's probably maybe why interviewers do that thing about stepping back, because they're already in charge. You know what I mean?
So you're saying, like, I'm the boss and I can kind of do anything I like. It's
that's how I see it.
Not really the vibe I was going for. Now you come to mention it. No, go on, seriously.
It's never the vibe, but it is the reality.
Yeah. Carry on. Give me your little pleb. Let me listen to your view.
Well, I tell you what. Here's what I've got from you about what it's about, and I'll see if that leads me into anything I want it to be about too, because I haven't thought about that. Forgive me for that. But what I'm hearing from what you're saying, it's a lovely idea. You're talking about how art, both in its creation and in its exhibition, in its communication between the artist and the audience, or whatever form that takes. You were talking about the relationship between that and struggle, like how it can be a manifestation of the human struggle against oppression in any form, whether that's a financial oppression, like being poor and being an artist, whether it's political oppression, as in freedom of speech issues, or whether it's, say, in my case, something I know a lot about is speaking loosely, mental health arena. I've been quite badly traumatized as a person through some quite unpleasant situations in my life, and that has been a massive factor in my own work as a songwriter and performer in my life. And so that's how I understand the show. That I think I still don't know for sure if I've got that right, but that's what I heard when you put it forward. And to me, that seems really a great starting point. I think that's for me, that's interesting enough that I haven't stopped to think what I would do with it. Do you know what I mean?
I think
so that's quite glowing.
I think you've grasped what's some of the main theme. I mean, I think in truth that we have to see where these things go. And one thing I've understood about art is not to control it. Allow the flow to happen. And then I know that doesn't mean don't control things and don't try and direct things. It doesn't mean that at all. It means that when you start something,
no, I know,
don't be too rigid. Yeah. So I mean, I wouldn't word it like what you did. I mean, for me, there's other things, but I think that's a good touch. And maybe at this moment, because we're just trying to get something sharp, something maybe for Jonas to muck around with, and trying to get the length right. Maybe we just finish it there for today.
We could. I'm going to give you a quick option because you've made me think of something.
Oh, go on.
If you want, if we've got 2 minutes, do you think we've got 2 minutes?
Yeah, we can do 2 minutes. Yeah.
You've inspired me. I want to do a little story, and this might be useful for the sort of the pilot you're putting together with your buddy there. But I've forgotten his name. Is it Jonas?
Yeah, Jonas.
Jonas. Hi, Jonas. Basically, saying hi to the technical team. Just saying, basically, no, just out of interest, that example you gave about not controlling art, I'd like to come back on that really quickly and we'll wind it up. The song that I wrote that was the most important, it turned out, in my performances at the Squirrel, and that people generally seem to agree is my best piece of work, I think it's my best piece of work, is a song called Young and Insane, right? Which ended up being a 4-chord trick with a sort of circular melody, but a lot of lyrics. And you appreciate this as a guy who's done a lot of poetry. I don't know if I've ever played it. It's on the CD though, and basically it's my greatest achievement. And I wanted to capture. I talked earlier about having some mental health challenges, and one of the problems I had, I don't think I had manic depression as such, but I did have a very elevated sort of mood issue, which was I tended to be sort of a little bit, I wouldn't say manic, but over kind of a little bit elevated in mood, let's say, and I had a lot of racing thoughts, and I wanted to write a song about that, so I wrote a song that galloped along. But when I first designed the song, originally it was going to be like a soul number, because it was going to be based on the song When You're Young and in Love, which is a kind of a Motown tune, I think. I should know that. Yeah, I have heard it, but I don't actually have the song. But I set out with this idea that I would enter the realm of Motown, right? Me, this white guy, and I would write a song that was just based on When You're Young and in Love, but it'd be about mental health stuff. And I was completely confident I could do this and would do it. And the song started coming together, and almost immediately it became this sort of it was kind of like musical structure. It's like Let It Be on speed. You know what I mean? That's kind of what it is.
No, I never touched yourself.
Quite. And I remember the moment when I realised I'd actually written this kind of punk rock song, right? Or certainly new wave sort of song. And it was never going to be a soul number. It was not even remotely. But the thing it had become, I was incredibly excited about. I remember exactly where I was sat. I think it was the first time I actually had to do that thing about giving up control and just think, you've got a fork in the road here. You've got the idea you originally had, which has gone nowhere anyway, and you're about to write this kind of sort of punky garage band sort of song. And I just went, well, look, I'm just going to go with the flow. And in the end, it had absolutely no relationship musically to my original idea, but it went on to be the most important piece of writing I ever did, and that's just something I wanted to throw in.
I think
if I'd stopped that,
I think it's really interesting for 2 reasons. One is you touched on a subject that we're going to talk about more in the future, mental health and art, which I think is very important. We'll come back to that. But you've also talked about this idea of starting with something and finishing with something else, which I think...
And completely different.
And I think that's one of That's just one of the little things that maybe over the period of all these shows we'll start to educate ourselves, and have a bit of an idea about what is this process of art. Not just from a political perspective, but for me, all things are political. But what is the process of art? Where does it come from? What does it do? What's it for? And you know what I think we should do? I think we should finish this podcast with a recording of that song. What do you reckon?
Oh, well, okay, that'd be great. I mean, okay. In fact, do you know what's interesting? The guitarist out of the band has just recently digitally revised it. So, because you remember the drummer had terrible timing difficulties.
Well, as a drummer, I understand him, and and as a dyslexic, I also understanding that timing's not what people think it should be. So I'll take his side on this one.
But you might be familiar. You might be familiar with some very wayward timing on that track, which have now been digitally corrected by the drummer. So we've even got, if you wanted, we can even play a much improved. Even though it's cheating, I know it's cheating, but we're young and we don't have much time in the studio and stuff like that. So that'd be great.
Okay, well, Paul.
Say what?
I said geniuses don't borrow, they steal. And we'll come back to that one as well in a future.
Yeah, but that'd be awesome. Yeah, I'd be very, very excited.
Okay, well, let's finish it there for today. This is Paul Paranoid. He's going to be back on the show as a regular fixture, giving his comments, giving his views, and for this first test run show, let's have a listen to what Paul's got to say in his music.
Well, if you want to get on in the world, it doesn't seem to be a problem for anyone else. Yeah, thanks for your assistance. Now I've got to go into town when I don't really want to go in at all. And everybody's so uncomfortable with everyone else, and you're taking it on yourself. And you care about yourself, but it really doesn't matter, cause however hard you work, you'll always be a slacker. And you're always out of breath, cause you're always late for something. Do your very best, but you're only good at nothing. And you wanna see your life, but you know you're really on it, cause the next one you light up will be the one that gets you cancer. The people that you could be more like, and the people that you could be more like. Supposed to get around, just do you for the benefit of everyone else. You're going through the motions, run with the best of the rest, not with all the goodwill in the world. I was beginning to hallucinate, start to disassociate myself from all this badness. As you bring it on yourself, but that was always so apparent. You discover when yourself is leaving people feeling threatened, and you're always saying things when you know you don't really mean them. Never what you wanna be or what you wanted to be doing. All the feelings that you have, they never find expression to the flavors to yourself, just giving into your depression. And the people that you could be more like, all the people that you could be more like when you were young and insane. Kill myself before I get to 25. So I'm sick of the hypocrisy, I'm sick of the inanity in the midst of my life. In the midst of my life. In the midst of my life. My life. It's in the way you see yourself. I knew all the possibilities, the enemies in your head. And not enough vicinity, you're foolish to expect so much for your integrity, but now you liberate a split second of your clarity, and you want it to yourself. If your dwelling is a pity, but in the words of your best friend, you always wanted to be happy too much. You want a cigarette, but you know you really on it, cause the next one you light up will be the one that gives you cancer, and you can't afford to face the world. Letting go of everything you believe, letting go of everything you believe. You get some pretty strange ideas in your head when you're young and insane.
I hope you enjoyed the show today. If If you've got anything to say to this podcast, or even something to play to this podcast, then please get in contact. The information will be below. Take care now.